Alright, so this one here is a real-world example. The entrance of an office building is an arch in the shape of a parabola whose vertex is the height of the arch. The height of the arch is given by h equal to 9 minus x squared, where x is the horizontal distance from the center of the arch. Both h and x are measured in feet. How wide is the arch at ground level? So what we're looking for is when our h is equal to 0. And of course our formula that's given to us, h is equal to 9 minus x squared. So that means we have zero equal to 9 minus x squared. So these ones, whenever you're missing that middle term, there's no like a 2x or something like that with it, are kind of nice, especially whenever you have a 9 as the number with it, because it's a perfect square. So what we're going to do is we're going to just add x squared to both sides. Make this as easy as we can on ourselves. We have x squared equal to 9, and now we're just going to square root both sides. Now, typically with a square root, if you're solving an equation with this without real-world application, you're going to do plus or minus the square root. But since we have a real-world application and negative wouldn't make any sense, we're not going to deal with that. So x is equal to 3. And really, actually, with this one, we should go ahead and do plus or minus. So that means that our x being plus or minus 3 means our parabola does this at negative 3 and 3, and it's asking us how wide the arch is at ground level. So we're looking for this distance here, or this width, I guess would be the better term for it. So our width is just 6 feet. Right? It's from the negative 3 to the positive 3, so it's 6. So this next one, we're getting into looking at negative numbers with a square root. So in the past, whenever you did a square root problem and you got a negative inside of a square root, you had to stop and say, oh, I can't do anything now. So that's not true anymore. So what we're going to start to look at now is our imaginary or complex numbers. So what this means is that we no longer just say, oh, square root of negative 28, we got to stop there. So what we're going to do is there's this thing called the complex number, or the imaginary number, I, and I is just the square root of negative 1. And there's kind of a pattern that goes along with it. So if you square I, that's just negative 1, right? Because the square of a square root just cancels that out, leaves you with what's inside the square root. Now if you cube root that, or if you cube that, you end up with basically what you're doing is multiplying I times I squared, right? We just said that I is the square root of negative 1, and I squared is negative 1. So I times negative 1. Or, oops, should put that next to it. I times negative 1, or just negative I to the fourth is equal to I squared times I squared, which again we know I squared is negative 1. So negative 1 times negative 1, or just 1. And if I continue this to see what that does, we'll notice a trend. So I squared times I cubed, we already said I squared is negative 1, and I cubed is negative I. Negative times a negative is a positive, so this is just I. So now we're back to the top, right? So at this point, the pattern just continues. So I to the 6th is negative 1, I to the 7th is negative I to the 8th is 1, and so on. I'm not going to keep writing these down for you, but the pattern continues from there. So as long as you can break them down and figure out which one it lines up with, it's going to be one of those 4 things. Either I, negative 1, negative I, 1, or positive I. Yeah. So here we have negative 28. So the first thing we're going to do, anytime you end up with a negative, pull out that negative. which means pull out the I. So it's the I times the square root of 28. Now we need to break down 28. 28 is 4 times 7, and 4 is 2 times 2. So now any pair we have, like these 2's, everything's prime at this point. 2 and 7 are prime. So anything we have now that can pair up like that can come out of our radical as well, our root. So the 2 can come out, so it's 2i times the square root of 7. And that is it simplified as much as possible. Now I'm going to give you one to try.